This is everything you ever wanted to know about VoIP phones. Here is a diagram kind of outlining it. I will leave timestamps down below, so if you need a specific spot in this video, by all means, jump to it. Let's start with a broad overview of what all the components are, because so many people just show PBX or just show the actual IP phones, but you need to go end to end, and that's what we're going to do right now. First up, the SIP provider. This is the one providing the phone number and the ability to call out. These are always charged, meaning I have to pay a monthly fee for a phone number and any usage I do. I personally like to go pay as you go because it's very, very cheap here in the United States. I use FlowRoute. It's 50 cents for the number per month and then a half a penny per minute. I usually do maybe a couple hours, so this works out to be about $1 every month. So $12 a year for my SIP provider. But if you do spend a bunch, let's say it's a small business and you're doing thousands of hours on the phone, you're probably going to want a more dedicated plan with your SIP provider. And if you're in the EU, you're not going to be using FlowRoute. Probably you're going to use something else, but I'll show you all the other providers. And then you go through the internet with a PBX. The PBX is basically what facilitates the call. It handles routing, reception, everything that goes on. And this can be tricky to set up. I've actually been a lead engineer for a satellite company. I've set up a whole host of different ones to government entities, to large corporations, even touched into some social media networks back in the day. But with that said, I will show two different ones, self-hosted and then the simple, easy way, which we're actually going to go the hard way. But I will be able to skip those and we'll end up with a dashboard that we can use on both self-hosted and hosted with 3CX. But the self-hosted, I'm going to be using a Raspberry Pi, which I have one right here. This Raspberry Pi is about 50 bucks and you can use it till the end of time. If you're only doing one or two numbers, this whole part's going to be free for you pretty much forever. But if you're in a small business or above and you want more reliable constant connections, I highly recommend doing the 3CX cloud hosting. This is only, I think, $200 a year after the first year. The first year is completely free, so you can try it out for free, and then, heck, 200 bucks is cheaper than the electricity costs on a traditional PBX that handles a lot of phones. Those are your options. For today's video, though, since I've only got a couple phones here, we're going to go the self-hosted, free forever Raspberry Pi route. And then once we set that up, we'll actually tie in our IP phones, label all our inbound and outbound rules, and set up everything so we can actually do phones. And the phones we're using are right here. This is a Fanvil phone, traditional desktop phone, and we'll be doing outbound calls to an actual number to where I'll actually pick up on my cell phone. But with that first, let's get into our SIP provider. Here's my flow route. I have loaded up about $40, which should last me pretty much 6 months to a year, depending on my usage here at the house or the studio. So with that, the first thing I do is the interconnection. And this is where we would set up our SIP registration, and we'll need to jot down under the registration tab, but not just jotting down the SIP credentials. We actually need to lock down and secure our SIP trunk as well, because we don't want somebody stealing our phone numbers and then doing a bunch of robocalls. Under IP authentication, type in home or work or wherever this is going to be used, the actual external IP of this, and hit add address. If you do have a dynamic IP, obviously, you're going to have to come back in here, probably change it whenever it does change, but hopefully you have a static. And if you don't, mine's actually a dynamic, so I don't really even care about it. But let's say it does change on me, I would need to come back in here and add it again. So after we have our registration information, we need to go to DIDs. This is direct dials. This is my direct dial right here. You can see I'm charged 50 cents a month for this, and then also a half a penny per minute. And that's it. So I have all those, and that's the capabilities of this line. If you do need to port a number, let's say you're already with another provider like AT&T or something, and you want to get rid of your cell phone and use this instead, you can come over to port orders, put in a port order, and start porting it from your existing provider to FlowRoute in this instance. But everyone has ports, and that is the SIP provider, the main chunk of the person doing the back end work here for actually making all the calls with the rest of the world. Next up, we need to address the PBX, and I'm using 3CX for this one. We're going to do the year free here, and actually we're going to get even more than a year free because we'll do self-hosting. So we'll just do Chris Titus Tech, and we'll do Chris Titus Tech at christitus.com and say, let's go. This is going to send me an email. I'll go ahead and authenticate. And now we'll have our customer portal here. We'll need to put in our phone number and actually do a password as well. We'll take our DID right here from our flow route or our SIP provider. Your SIP provider might be different. We'll paste that in, and we need to do a plus. And we'll hit next. Now you can choose what you want to do here. You can do hosted. Again, if you're a business, I highly recommend just doing the hosted. You're not going to save much money by doing a self-host. But since we're going to be doing on-prem, we'll go ahead and do it on a Raspberry Pi down here. Now, we'll just say Raspberry Pi 4, and this actually just grabs it for us. The cool part about this is the actual image we're going to use for the Raspberry Pi 4. On top of that, they have a fantastic installation guide. I think anybody could actually install this thing. Now, I had problems with the official image file. So what I'm going to do is just go into here using the Raspberry Pi imager officially from the Raspberry Pi. And I'm going to go Raspberry Pi OS Other and then do the light version right here. You don't want to do full because you don't want a full desktop experience, as that's going to take away a lot of performance from your Raspberry Pi. And we'll choose our storage, and we're going to just try it from here now. All right, we've done the full official light version of Raspberry Pi now. Let's try this image. All right, that looks promising. So there you go. If the official image from 3CX doesn't work, just use the Raspberry Pi light image again. Be wary of the desktop version. And here comes our initial boot. All right, the password for Raspberry Pi is going to be Pi and then Raspberry. Now, I like to resize the terminal anytime I'm working in console, so I'm going to do that real fast. And I have an entire dedicated video on console resize setups. If you're interested, I'll put a link up in the top. And I always like to use the Terminus font, and usually about a 12 by 24. If you want super big, you can do 16 by 32. And then we clear that out, get a little more clarity out of our prompt. And now we can actually go into a lot of the configuration. We'll do a sudo raspi config. We need to set the host name first. So we'll go system and then host name. And then I'm going to name this 3CX. Now, as far as the interface goes, I do like to go ahead and enable SSH so we can work on a regular box so we don't have to log into this box ever again. And then we need to set the IP as well. So now we have SSH and the host name set. We'll just hit finish. And we can just do a reboot. And then we need to change the password of Pi. Anytime you set up any kind of telephony, security is a must because it's a very, very desired target among hackers. So we're just going to go password D, and we're going to change the password for Pi. Again, that's password WD. All right, and we're almost done. Now we just need to do our dedicated IP address. A static IP is a must. So we're just going to go with sudo, and you can use nano for this or vim. And this is just going to be etc.dhcpd.conf. And we'll just set up our static IP all the way at the bottom here. We need an uncomment interface, static IP 1. I don't bother with IPv6, our router, and then also our name servers. For our static IP, I'm actually in the 69 subset, and we'll set this one to 19. -24 is just saying the subnet mask is going to be 255.255.255.0. And then we need to put our router. Chances are it's .1 on your specific IP range. And then for the name servers, we'll do 69.1. And then I don't like to use Google's 8.8. I like 1.1, which is Cloudflare. I'm going to erase our IPv6 one. And then I'm going to do quad 9s as well. But choose your own DNS. That's just my preference. And then we'll just do Control O to write out and Control X to exit. And now we should be able to reboot. We'll be using our new password. We'll have a static IP and SSH is now enabled. So we'll just do a reboot. All right, now it's back on this screen. We can go ahead. All we need to leave in there is an Ethernet cable or Wi-Fi if you're using Wi-Fi. I highly recommend Ethernet though. And then it doesn't even need an actual monitor. We just need power and network connectivity. So with that, I'm going to disconnect and we'll SSH in and finish the actual setup on the Pi. All right, we'll launch our Windows terminal here, or you could use PowerShell, whatever you're using Just something that can do SSH, and we're going to do pi at 192.168.69.19. We'll say yes to the fingerprint, and then our new password. And now what I like to do, and why I like to finish this setup, is from the setup guide from 3CX, down at the bottom, it's a single liner to do the rest. It's just this right here. We'll just copy that, come back into here, paste it in, and then we should get everything done for us. And then from here, you want the first option, unless you're doing an SBC. Remember when I started this out, you said you want to set up 10,000 employees somewhere? Well, if you had a dedicated Linux box at each branch office, you'd probably want to do an SBC, which is a session border controller that handles tons of IP phones. You might want to do this in an office with 10 or 20 IP phones and above, but since we're only doing a handful and we're just doing this box, we'll just do the first option. All right, we'll agree to our license agreement. Now, how do you want to run this tool? I would recommend just doing it using a web browser. That way you have the full dashboard. And it gives us our IP address right there. So now we can go over to our web browser and type this guy in. And if we hit Control click, you can do it automatically if you're using Windows Terminal. And this is where we create a new one. We just need to paste our license key in. So going back to our portal, we need to grab our license key right here. We'll copy it. And then we'll just paste that right here. Go next. And then we just select our username, which I'm going to use Chris Titus Tech. And then we'll just use a regular password. I will say on this one, you do need to actually do a 10 character long. Most places are 8 characters, but this one requires 10. This will actually grab your external IP address and put it in. This is my external IP address, which I blurred out. You should never need to change this. Leave all your port settings at default. Always use the IP, I would say. Fully qualified domains are for if you're running your own DNS, which most people won't be. Once that's complete, extension length, whichever you want to do here, it's up to you. This is just the actual extension to dial inter-office or between branch offices. And then we can just put our admin email, which I'm going to put contact@christitus.com. I'm Central Time in the United States, and we'll set up our operator extension. This would usually be your receptionist, but I'm going to go ahead and put my name down for it. Countries calls can be made to. You do want to go ahead and block off most other countries. Unless you're a worldwide business, you typically don't want to be receiving calls from outside of your country because this can be extremely expensive, especially for your SIP provider. We'll just leave everything there. All right, now it's going to create the whole PBX. And from this point, this is exactly where cloud hosting would be at as well. So anybody from the cloud hosting will go ahead and join in on us. But the cloud hosting is just a one-click create, where this is a whole build out. Now, if you do have problems connecting to your internal device from outside, you do need to put port forwardings. This is a Ubiquiti security gateway that I have. Yours is probably different, but just remember port forwarding, add in ports 5001, 5060, 5061, and the rest are optional, mainly for media settings. Now we're into the actual management console and configuration. We're going to actually use our username. If you use the cloud-based setup, it's already all created for you, but the username would be what was the final screen on the Raspberry Pi setup if you did it through a self-hosted. Now you can set up the app and do a soft phone on your cell phone if you like. Just scan the QR code. Now the first thing we want to do in our console is set up our user. There's some red here. You can go ahead and ignore it. Most times it just takes a little bit to set up. Since I'm doing this on a Pi, it's a little bit laggy. Obviously the cloud host is a lot faster. So if we come down to extensions, I think on the cloud version it's users, but on this one it's extensions. We'll start setting up this. Web client is just like looking at voicemails and other things. You can actually disable this if you don't want your users doing it. Most users will just ignore it and not use it anyways. DIDs, if you want to assign certain extensions, specific direct dials, you can. It does require your SIP provider to have those numbers to assign. Since I only have one number, I'm not obviously going to do this. And you can even do SMS on the professional enterprise versions of this. Voicemail. One thing to pay attention here is the PIN number here, 2991. We need to remember that. Our extension's 100. When we go to upgrade our phone, it's going to provide and say, hey, what's the username and what's the PIN or the password on the phone? That's what it's wanting, the extension number and that PIN number. Forwarding rules. This is where you could forward directly to your cell phone if you like. Very powerful if you're a workaholic and you want to get that out of the office. You can just put your cell phone number in here and that's it. There you go. Phone provisioning. Now, this is if you want to just use an app on your phone, you could do that, but I actually want to use this Fanvil device. This thing is amazing. I want to use that as my desk phone. So to do that, the very first thing we need to do is one, make sure your device is capable, and you need to download the firmware. So this one is actually Fanvil X3U that I went ahead and bought off Amazon for about 60 bucks. But there's a lot of really good phones in here, like the Yealink T48U is amazing looking. I have that at the office. But this one right here is what I use. They do recommend Fanvils. They work hand in hand and it looks really slick. I love the Fanvil phones. So you download that firmware, go into your settings menu on your phone. From the settings menu, hit status, and then just look at the IP. Now that we have our IP, you just put it in here. The default username and password for Fanvil is just admin. Now you will get some errors about default password in use. As soon as it gets provisioned and this phone gets set up, it'll change it to a secure password. So don't worry about that admin. We'll just come right over to upgrade, select that image file you downloaded from here. Now, if you have problems and you're not able to get into your phone, for the Fanvil phones, there's 3 ways to actually modify this. The one I recommend is when it's booted up, hold the OK button. It'll flash up on the screen. Do you want a factory reset? Just hit yes, wait for it to reset, and then proceed. Other ways is to, obviously, if you have the username and password, just do it through the web interface. Or if you need to do it this way, you hold pound as it starts up and then put in this special code to reset it. Now with that done, we can provision our phone, and we do that with an authentication name and password. And we also need to look at the MAC address that is on this phone itself. If we go to information, you'll see the MAC address right here. Copy that down. I've obviously blurred it out because I don't want you provisioning my phone for me. We'll just come into here. We'll hit add phone. Now we select what we have. Like I said, it's a Fanvil X3U, and we're going to paste that MAC address. We need to add the authentication ID and password, which we'll go ahead and copy our ID, go to auto provision. Under authentication name, we put our ID in. For the password, we put that in, and we simply hit apply. Okay, to provision this phone, at the actual console here, we have a provisioning link. Notice how it says local LAN, and it means any phone that's inside is going to connect to that Raspberry Pi, but it has to be on my network. So we're going to just take this entire provisioning link right here, copy it, go over to our Raspberry Pi. We're going to paste it in here. For the configuration file, we'll leave it blank. For this actual protocol type, we're going to leave it HTTP. As you notice, the Fanvil does not use HTTPS since it's just a static IP on your LAN. With that said, we hit apply, let this process, and then we can go auto provision now and auto provision. On our phone, we should see an update. And sure enough, update finished. Now, if we go to phones, you can see there's our phone with everything right as it is with our MAC address over here. And the cool thing about this, let's say you want to actually physically be on that phone, come on over to the eye. You can actually see the user ID, password, phone password, all that stuff that's being used. This is actually the voicemail password for a PIN. So you can write all this down if you need to locally administer this phone. You can also click it, upgrade the firmware, manually reboot, reprovision. Oh, you just, anything and everything's on the table here. But it gets even cooler. From the extensions, we need to set up our BLFs or our busy lamp fields. I like to set number 1 to the line key. That tells you if you're actually being on the line or off the line. Number 2, usually I set to a local speed dial. Usually that's another person. I wouldn't normally set this to myself. I would probably set this to another phone that would be inside. And then usually I would do a custom speed dial for number 3. Obviously, the bigger the phone, the more options you have for numbers. For this, you can just set up any cell phone number that you want to dial out. But we're not done yet. With this phone, we're pretty much finished. But now we can move on to actually inbound and outbound rules, because right now, everything's set up, but it doesn't know what to do with inbound calls and it doesn't know what to do with outbound calls, so we have to fix that. So first, we'll register our SIP trunk. We'll go ahead and say add SIP trunk. We'll select our country. I'm in the US. Then we select all these SIP providers that are here. We have a lot to choose from, so if you don't like what I'm using, which is FlowRoute, by all means, you don't need to use it. We'll just type that right in there and hit OK. Max simultaneous calls, we're going to put at 8. 3CX's free plan only allows 8 simultaneous calls, which You'd have to have at least 8 phones, and everyone would have to be on the phone to reach that. You typically won't reach that until you get to an office of about 40 to 50 people. Then we put our registration, authentication ID, and password in, and then we have everything set here. So this is the main number, the extension's 100, Chris Titus, so it's going to ring my extension anytime someone dials the main number. And you can set this up. Typically, you'd want to set this up for like a voicemail or an auto receptionist if you don't have a receptionist. We're going to pretend like I'm the receptionist for now. Now, it shows up red. This means it's not registered correctly. Let's go ahead, wait a second, and then we'll just simply refresh the page. And there it goes. It's gone green. Registration set. Registration okay. Now we are ready to do an inbound and outbound call. We'll go into the inbound rules. Select our DID rule. This is just going to be an all rule. Typically, you might have separate rules for everything coming in, but we're just going to say everything into this this actual number, come to this extension, and you can set office hours. So a good way to route inbound calls is say 9 to 5. Let's say your business is open 9 to 5. You would have it come to the receptionist, and then after hours, you would have this actually set to a voice box of an extension 100, which would be the receptionist. We'd hit OK. So you can see in-office routing here, out-of-office routing to the voicemail. With inbound done, now we got to set our outbound rules. We'll just go ahead and hit add. And this is going to be an all rule as well. So this is fun to do. It's various depending on whatever PBX you're in. I've set this up manually and had to hard code it in an asterisk system, which is very difficult. This makes it simple, super simple. So what I do is calls of the number of length of 10. So 214, blah, 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 blah. Usually it's always 10 digits when someone dials out, just like on your cell phone. Your SIP provider is not going to be able to do much with that. So what we need to do is say, hey, route 1, flow. We're not stripping anything. We need to prepin 1, and we need to set the caller ID to our main office DID, unless you wanted a specific DID for outbound calls. So that's going to be our outbound caller ID. It's going to go ahead, and I'm going to do 214, blah, 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 but then it's going to go 1214 to that number I'm doing. So it's going to go ahead and add that 1 for me, and then it's going to change my caller ID to be the main office number. Now that is done, and we are ready to make our first call. I have this number, or this actual phone over here, set up. I'm going to go ahead and give it one more reboot and get those reprovision. I'm going to take another screenshot of it. It should show all those BLF fields, or the busy lamp fields. So we should have a line 1, inner office number, and then a custom number. All right, and here is our phone right here. We're going to actually make a call out. I'm going to go ahead and type in my cell phone number, which I'm going to have to turn the screen away. And I'm going to just hit pound. You can do pound to go ahead and initiate the calling, or you can just hit dial on the phone itself. And there we go. It's calling. And you can see. There we go. Hello. Hello. That's pretty cool. So all through my cell phone. So right there, I got charged about half a penny. Maybe. We'll see. It depends on the actual duration of the call. I think they don't actually start charging until you go over 60 seconds. But after 2 minutes, you get charged 1 cent, which is pretty darn powerful for an office phone. Now, there's a lot more I'd love to show you, because I could literally talk about this for days on end. And I will go ahead and, if you're interested, let me know in the comments of doing like digital reception, doing a full-blown chat service that links in with this phone service on your website. You can do a whole host of things, conference calls, which I didn't have time to show here, where we could do a full-blown Zoom call between different webcams, which is very, very powerful. And then, you know, the sky's the limit. It's just such a cool technology that is so badly misunderstood, and honestly is way overcharged in most markets. So I was really happy to partner with 3CX on this one and actually bring new content to the channel, something that is usually really poorly implemented in the business realm and usually way overcharged, where this thing just goes and goes and goes forever. I know I can set this up and leave it, and I'll probably go ahead and tear everything down because I didn't want to blur out a ton of stuff in this video, and I'll probably delete most of these configs. But I had a blast making this video, and it was just something new because, little tidbit here at the end, the first 5 videos I ever uploaded was actually going over free PBX, and I went ahead and made a huge series on it specifically for one of my ex-employers, because a lot of people didn't understand the free PBX interface because it's not nearly as intuitive as what we see in 3CX. But with all that said, let me know your thoughts down in the comments section, and I'll see you in the next one.